This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Atelier with tonight's top stories from East Asia. China's defense minister calls on major countries to take the lead in safeguarding global security in comments made at the Xiangshan Forum. North Korea gives the first glimpse into a factory producing weapons-grade nuclear materials, with leader Kim Jong Un urging his engineers to expand production of uranium. Now, the fallout from medical reforms and the cost of living crisis weighing on what South Koreans think of their president. A poll of voters suggests record low approval for Yoon Suk-yeol. And China endorses a plan to raise the retirement age for the first time in 47 years as it tries to slow a decline in the labor force and support the economy. After a whirlwind tour of 4 countries in the Asia-Pacific, the Pope departs Singapore, leaving behind fond memories for Catholic devotees.
I feel so great, so happy to see the Pope for the second time. I'm so happy, so joyful.
China is urging major countries to take the lead in safeguarding global security. In a wide-ranging speech at the annual Xiangshan Forum, Chinese Defense Minister Dong Un made a pitch to the global south, saying that China will enhance military ties with its neighbors and in particular with developing countries. Mr. Dong also called on all countries to promote peaceful development and inclusive governance. CNA's Tan Si-hui has more.
Projecting China as a responsible major power that looks after its less developed partners. Chinese Defense Minister Dong Un told military officials from more than 100 countries that China will work with them as equal partners to build new security partnerships.
面对世界性挑战，大国应作出表率，以维护全人类安全为己任，摒弃零和博弈。 放眼今天的世界，多极化已成为推动时代发展的蓬勃动力。这是共享平等的舞台，在这里应该没有369等，而是各国一律平等，不分东西南北，都有
Touching on the need to strengthen security governance in new domains such as artificial intelligence, and without naming names, Mr. Dong used his speech to criticize the U.S. tech blockade against China.
防止泛化国家安全概念，私筑小院高墙，让新域治理真正能够 均衡地反映各国利益的诉求，让新兴技术更好地造福全人类。
Mr. Dong, a former naval commander, was appointed in December following a high-profile anti-corruption purge of the military that led to the sacking of 2 of his predecessors. Veiled jabs targeting the U.S. could still be found in Chinese Defense Minister Dong Un's half-hour-long speech, but it was a more conciliatory and moderate performance compared to his first international appearance at the Shangri-La Dialogue in June. There, he had delivered a diatribe against separatists and external forces in Taiwan. Also missing from Mr. Dong's speech was China's dispute with the Philippines in the South China Sea, a topic that was hotly discussed at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore. The Xiangshan Forum is styled as China's answer to the Shangri-La Dialogue, Asia's premier security gathering. It's being seen as a platform for China to respond to views aired during the Shangri-La Dialogue, which China continues to criticize as being westernized. The theme for this year's Xiangshan Forum is promoting peace for a shared future. Mr. Dong said to resolve issues such as the Ukraine war and the Israel-Palestine conflict, peaceful negotiation is the only way out.
关键是要本着公心，不谋地缘利益， 不搞双重标准，以此赢得各方信任，凝聚更多共识，为当事方和和谈和解创造更多的有利条件。
Although Mr. Dong stayed away from some of the more contentious topics in his speech, outside the convention hall where he spoke, Chinese military officials have taken a much stronger tone, with one official criticizing the U.S. for promoting bloc confrontation and using its partners as pawns, while warning that the People's Liberation Army will resolutely crush any encroachment by foreign enemies when it comes to its interests in the South China Sea. Tan Si-hui, CNA, Beijing.
Well, we spoke to Benjamin Ho earlier. He's assistant professor for the China program at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, and he weighed in on how key discussions could play out in the forum, starting with tensions over the issue of Taiwan.
Well, China has insisted that the Taiwan issue is an internal matter and will go at lengths to repeat that no external interference is permitted. I doubt any country would want to push back on this issue in an explicit way, including the United States. As for the South China Sea, my own sensing is that Beijing is open to negotiation and to find common ground with other countries from a bilateral basis. However, they would not want the US or any other external party not from the region to get involved. So that will make it challenging for any significant breakthroughs to take place.
Dr. Ho, Beijing is said to be pitching the forum, the Xiangshan Forum, as an alternative to the Shangri-La dialogue because it sees that as too Western, bias against China. Now, could this idea gain traction among, I suppose, more neutral and pragmatic countries which are trying to balance, all that rivalry between the US and China?
Well, I think we all know that the Chinese are not very comfortable with an open style of questioning that is seen in the SLD. But that said, they have been participating in the SLD for a number of years now and would have learned how things work elsewhere. So as such, my own sensing is that some of the best practices from the SLD would have found its way into the thinking of the Xiangshan planners. So I wouldn't call the Xiangshan as a radical departure from any other military forum, except that the Chinese would now have greater say on the agenda and participation. And again, other countries, more neutral countries, would view the Xiangshan Forum as a platform where they are able to touch base with other military counterparts.
Okay, I get your point, but I'm just going to push a little bit more about this. What about, more US-aligned Asian countries who are a bit worried about China? I mean, can they be persuaded, that Beijing and the Xiangshan Forum is where global security concerns can be tackled? I mean, we had those comments from the Lieutenant General overnight. And the example, which is probably a bad one, and I'll probably get criticized for it, is almost like Russia inviting Ukraine, Poland, and Estonia and say, come, we'll talk about your security concerns.
Well, the way I see it, there is no reason why China should view a US-aligned Asian country or any other country in a negative light. I don't think there is any country which seeks an absolute alliance with US, nor any country which refuses to have any form of relations with China. So in other words, countries are primarily motivated by their own national interests, and they will align with whichever country whose interests best align with theirs. So to the extent that Xiangshan Forum is a platform where countries can come together, talk about their own national interests, I don't see why this should be controversial with China.
Beyond our backyard, China has been playing a role as a mediator in recent conflicts, such as the Russia-Ukraine war, also Israel-Hamas conflict. How might that impact its diplomatic positioning at the Xiangshan Forum?
Well, yes, you are right. We have seen China making some statements about the Russia-Ukraine war and the Israel-Hamas conflict, but these statements are mostly cast in very general terms, and there isn't a lot in terms of practical action, at least to me, to suggest that China will decisively mediate in these conflicts. In any case, I really doubt Beijing wants to muddy its hands too much in these matters insofar as they reflect unresolved historical grievances. I think China would prefer to focus on its own domestic development and leave these matters to other actors to sort them out.
And for more insights on the Xiangshan Security Forum, we will be speaking with Chong Ja-in, Associate Professor at the Department of Political Science at the National University of Singapore, a little later on East Asia Tonight. North Korean state media, in an unusual move, has shown images of leader Kim Jong Un visiting a uranium enrichment facility, giving a rare glimpse inside Pyongyang's nuclear program. Well, according to KCNA, Mr. Kim also called for the use of new centrifuges to produce more weapons-grade material for nuclear bombs. CNA's Lim Yun-suk has more.
Not much is known about North Korea's nuclear program, especially its highly enriched uranium facility. But North Korea's state media on Friday offered a rare glimpse of its secretive facility to produce weapons-grade uranium, saying its leader Kim Jong Un visited the Nuclear Weapons Institute and the production base of weapons-grade nuclear materials. Kim Jong Un was seen going around the control room of the uranium enrichment base and a construction site that would expand its capacity for producing nuclear weapons. The state media did not say when he visited the facilities and where they were located. South Korea condemned the report, saying it would never accept North Korea's possession of nuclear weapons.
북한의 어떠한 핵위협이나 도발도 굳건한 한미 동맹의 일체형 확장 억제 체제를 기반으로 한 우리 정부와 군의 압도적이고 강력한 대응에 직면하게 될 것임을 엄중히 경고합니다.
To help South Korea defend itself from the north, there are about 28,500 U.S. soldiers based in South Korea. And under that extended deterrence to South Korea is the U.S. commitment to use all weapons, including nuclear weapons, if needed, to defend South Korea from North Korea's threats. That's because South Korea is banned from developing and possessing its own nuclear weapons as a party to the NPT, the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty. Some experts said it was possible the South Korean government might have to reconsider the possibility of possessing its own nuclear weapons amid rising nuclear threats from North Korea, and also depending on the outcome of the U.S. presidential election in November.
트럼프 측이 내세운 힘을 통한 평화와 미국 우선주의 정책은 해리스 후보의 미국의 리더십 강화를 통한 국제주의 노선과 완전히 다른 비전을 제시하고 있습니다. 이 차이는 향후 5년간의 글로벌 질서에 중대한 영향을 미칠 것이며 그 변화는 미국의 동맹국뿐 아니라 중국, 러시아, 이란, 북한과 같이 미국과 불편한 관계를 맺고 있는 국가들에까지 파급될 것입니다.
A growing majority of South Koreans believe their country needs its own nuclear weapons instead of relying only on the U.S. for protection. Latest survey conducted in April by think tank the Asan Institute for Policy Studies showed that nearly 71% of 1,000 adults surveyed were in favor of South Korea having its own nuclear weapons. Lim Yun-suk, CNA, Seoul.
Staying with tensions on the Korean Peninsula, KCNA has run another report showing North Korean leader Kim Jong Un visiting a training base for Special Operations Forces. State media showed pictures of Mr. Kim touring various facilities and training grounds at the base. The media outlet did not disclose the location. Mr. Kim reportedly commented that their army needs to stand ready if war breaks out without notice. Mr. Kim later inspected a new 600mm multiple rocket launcher. Well, this report comes less than a day after North Korea tested several short-range ballistic missiles off the country's east coast. State media says the test was aimed at further developing the launcher's driving system. With the rising military assertiveness of North Korea, one could expect the people in the south to be on edge. And while some people remain indifferent to the rising tensions on the peninsula, others go as far as to stockpile their own emergency food rations. We'll take graduate student Shin Nari. She's been studying North Korea-related affairs, and she fears that younger generation does not realize just how dangerous of a threat North Korea is.
I was thinking, am I being delusional, getting ready for this? But for me, since I study, for me, it's kind of makes sense.
And it's mostly the older generation and conservatives who are uneasy about North Korea. And that's because most of them have witnessed or heard stories of active combat. Now, this young man living with his in-laws had to build a bunker in their front yard.
어머님이 일단 전쟁 세대시고 그리고 이러한 재난 문자나 이런 것들 작년에 이렇게 막 오고 하면서 불안감도 좀 있었고요. 마침 그 당시에 공사도 진행하던 부분들이 있어서 그때 공사를 진행하면서 땅을 판 김에 같이 벙커도 좀 짓자라고 해서 그렇게 짓게 됐습니다.
But not everyone is as alarmed by North Korea or its nuclear threats. The long-standing tensions between the two countries have become routine.
We're given this context. We live here. This is our home. Where can we go if there is any provocative or anything happens? We have to accept that as context in our life.
Gauging South Korean opinion on the North has been difficult. Surveys show that the level of alert spikes up usually after big provocations, but they also sizzle soon after. But notably, there have been growing questions among the South Korean public as to whether Washington's nuclear umbrella is actually reliable. Asan Institute says repeated public polls show more than half of the general public want Seoul to build its own nukes.
The U.S. is also distracted not only by situations in the Middle East or situations in Europe that puts a premium on U.S. defense posture in the region, and what would even happen as an added layer if the U.S. was concerned about their own spaces. At the same time, they're trying to have a credible deterrence toward North Korea for South Korea's sake. So I think we have seen a change and a shift in that perspective as North Korea continues to develop its program.
Coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Japan classifies Seven & I as core to its national security, making it trickier for foreign firms to acquire the 7-Eleven owner. Hong Kong's biggest IPO in 3 years is set to get larger. Chinese appliance giant Media could reportedly raise $4 billion as it expands its share sale to meet investor demand. We're glad you're spending your Friday evening with us in East Asia tonight. It is now time for your business news, and Roland Lim, he's all ready to wrap up the day's business news before we head to the weekend. And Roland, I believe China set the ball rolling on its efforts to reform the pension system. What's that all about?
Right, you are, Telly. The country's top lawmakers have approved a plan to raise the retirement age for the first time in more than 40 years. Now, the reform comes as the country's battling economic headwinds and pressure from an aging population, while local governments face pension budget deficits. The ruling Communist Party said in July the retirement age will rise in a, quote, voluntary and flexible manner. The retirement age for men will rise to 63 from 60 years old. And for female blue-collar workers and cadres, the retirement age will increase to 55 and 58 years respectively. That's from 50 and 55 currently. Now, the change will take place gradually over 15 years starting from next January. The move will also affect pensions for the Chinese workforce from 2030. Now, to receive monthly benefits, workers must make basic pension contributions for a minimum of 20 years from the existing 15 years. And this will take place gradually, rising by 6 months every year. Now, China's retirement ages are among the lowest globally, despite a significantly higher life expectancy. Now, in Japan, workers can start receiving pensions at 65, while in South Korea it's 63. A bigger tax base and delayed access to benefits will likely relieve the pressure on Beijing to fund pensions. But Chinese netizens have expressed concerns, complaining about a sluggish job market, and some users also pointed out how employers tend to discriminate against older candidates, a problem that officials vowed to address last month. Chinese mainland markets extended losses this Friday as investors squared off their books for the upcoming holiday. Shanghai Composite losing nearly 0.5% to close at its lowest level since February. Now, Chinese markets entering a long weekend. China is off Monday, Tuesday. Hong Kong is off on Wednesday. But tomorrow, it's scheduled to release top-tier economic data, including home prices, industrial production, and retail sales. A solid rebound, though, for the benchmark Hang Seng Index in Hong Kong. Mainland developers there gaining on speculation that China might cut its mortgage rates. The weakness in its economy is also pushing money into China's bond market. Yields on the 10-year note has hit a record low. Traders are snapping up government bonds despite the authorities' efforts to stem the rally. Now, state banks are said to be selling long-dated bonds to cool the frenzy, a sign that the central bank may have intervened. Beijing has suspended the operations of PwC China for 6 months and imposed a record fine of $62 million. punishment is for PwC's auditing lapses of collapsed property giant China Evergrande Group. The Big Four firm has been under the spotlight after China launched one of its biggest probes of financial fraud in history. Authorities say PwC helped cover up and condone Evergrande's fraud and failed to point out, quote, major mistakes in the real estate company's accounts. China's My Dear Group is reportedly set to raise $4 billion in an enlarged Hong Kong listing. To be priced at the top end of the marketed price range, the world's biggest appliance maker plans to sell 566 million shares instead of 492 originally planned. No final decision has yet been made as discussions are still ongoing. Order books for what's said to be Hong Kong's biggest IPO in 3 years were multiple times oversubscribed. Those said to be interested in subscribing include alternative asset manager Hillhouse Investment, as well as Singapore state investors GIC and Temasek. Other East Asian stocks ending mixed this Friday. The Nikkei 225 lost 0.7%, stronger yen weighing on exporter stocks. The Bank of Japan is standing pat on its rates next week's meeting. That's the anticipation anyway. But investors are also keeping a close eye on deliberations after it announced a surprise lift in the last gathering, and that helped spark market turmoil in the markets. In Seoul, the Kospi did edge higher, posting their best week in a month thanks to gains in auto and banking counters. Taiwan weighted index advancing 0.5%. Japan has classified 7&I Holdings as being core to national security. Announced in the Finance Ministry's updated list, the new categorization comes a week after the 7-Eleven owner rejected a $38.5 billion takeover bid from Canada's Alimentation Couche-Tard. The Circle K owner is reportedly thinking of raising its offer. Now, 7&I is among 88 companies joining the official list. The group of firms considered to have businesses core to Japan's national security generally includes those in sectors such as nuclear power. The criteria are stricter for foreign firms wanting to buy a stake in Japanese companies classified as core. Now, last month, it was reported that 7&I applied to become a core company on the rationale that its convenience stores play a critical role in supplying food and other essentials in the event of natural disasters. Now, on another merger and acquisition deal involving a Japanese firm, this time from the buyer's side, Nippon Steel is trying to quash American concerns that its near $15 billion planned merger with U.S. Steel presents a national security risk. The top executives from both steel companies reportedly met senior U.S. officials early this week to salvage the deal. Now, it had been media reports that President Joe Biden was preparing to block the merger, and both Republican President nominee Donald Trump and Democratic nominee Kamala Harris also opposed the transaction. The ongoing takeover saga for 7&I isn't without its benefits, however. It's lifting the shares of Japanese retailers. Aeon, in particular, hit a record high this week as Alimentation Couche-Tard is reportedly thinking of improving its offer for the 7-Eleven owner. Now, other retail firms, including department store operator Isetan Mitsukoshi, have also outperformed the broader Japanese indices. Now, shares of Aeon, that's Japan's third biggest retailer by value, have outperformed since the takeover proposal for 7&I was first made public. It's also faring better than the Topix Retail Index. Now, that industry group itself has risen some 5.2% since the end of June, making it the best performer among the 33 in the broader Topix Index. Now, while the bid for 7&I has drawn investor attention to Japanese shops and restaurant chains, many of them are relatively cheap compared to their global peers. Also improving the sector's outlook are soaring tourist arrivals and signs of higher domestic spending. And you're up to date with the business news, Oteli.
Thanks so very much, Roland, for the business news. Well, time now for another break. But coming up on East Asia tonight, we return to our top story. China asking major countries to take the lead in safeguarding global security at the annual Xiangshan Forum. We discuss this further with our guest, Chong Jia-Ian of the National University of Singapore, next. You're watching East Asia tonight. North Korean state media has shown images of leader Kim Jong Un visiting a uranium enrichment facility, giving a rare glimpse inside Pyongyang's nuclear program. The approval rating for South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol plunges to a historic low after unpopular medical reforms and a cost of living crisis. And China's defense minister calls on major countries to take the lead in safeguarding global security in comments made at the Xiangshan Forum in Beijing. Singapore Defense Minister Ng Hen says his nation is studying the conflict in Ukraine very closely, calling it the most modern fought war in recent times. Dr. Ng says Singapore hopes to draw lessons for its military capability and its own defense strategy. Now, he made the observations while speaking on the sidelines of China's Xiangshan Security Forum. CNA's Tan Si-hui has the report.
It's been 2 years since the Russia-Ukraine war started, and the conflict in the Middle East shows no sign of slowing down. 10 years ago, the risk of regional conflict might have been near zero, according to Defense Minister Ng Hen. But now he says it is non-zero. When he spoke with Singaporeans, Dr. Ng noticed a significant change.
There's no difficulty convincing Singaporeans that you need a strong defense today. Yes, we've increased our defense budgets nominally. We bought new equipment, whether it's F-35s, submarines. I think Singaporeans' confidence go up when we strengthen the SAF. We are careful to explain to our neighbors that when we do so, we are purely a defense deterrent force. We are not a threat to anybody. Nobody sees us as a threat.
While there are hopes the regional landscape remains peaceful, he emphasized the need for a strong SAF. Dr. Ng says soldiers are now training more realistically with new equipment and facilities.
The SAF is studying very closely what has happened in Ukraine to understand, because this is probably the most modern fought war in recent times, and we are trying to decipher and take lessons from what it means for military capability and how Singapore devises its own national defense strategy.
Dr. Ng also spoke about the impact of the upcoming U.S. elections on Singapore and the region. Americans head to the polls in November to vote for either current U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris or former President Donald Trump. He says Singapore has worked with Republican and Democrat presidents before, and the country and the region were able to make progress. Dr. Ng adds he doesn't expect changes or crisis to happen. Meanwhile, other conflicts continue to heat up closer to home. Recent tensions between China and the Philippines in the South China Sea are cause for concern, with other countries, including the U.S., weighing in. And with this year's Xiangshan Forum themed Promoting Peace for a Shared Future, there are calls for a dialing down of tensions and for dialogue to continue. Dr. Ng was invited to speak at the forum, where he says China plays a key role in showing resolve and commitment in dealing with security issues. He also stressed the need for China-U.S. relations to improve following the recent meetings at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore and U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan's visit to China.
China, as a world leader, has articulated its desired norms and rules that will achieve a vision of the regional and world order. Here, inclusivity and universality are keys that have proven themselves crucial to maintain peace and progress and support from the largest numbers of countries.
Dr. Ng noted that China has a strong military and its economy has grown 50 times since its reform and opening up in 1978. With its economy more connected to the world than ever before, he urged China to uphold the global system and add strength and stability to it. Tan Si-hui, CNA, Beijing.
And for more insights, let's bring in Chong Jia-in, Associate Professor from the Department of Political Science at the National University of Singapore. Well, thanks for joining us, Professor Chong. I just want to pick up from Si-hui's story there earlier, where Dr. Ng, he emphasizes the importance of China articulating its desired norms and rules for the regional and world order. So, Professor, you know, we have seen several initiatives from China. They've got their Belt and Road, their growing influence in the international organizations. So what else do you think we might see from Beijing adding to that, or perhaps doing things differently?
So the PRC has been putting forward many initiatives. So in addition to what you said, There's the Global Security Initiative. There's the Global Civilizational Initiative. While the language is all, about inclusivity, it's all about universality. I think what's quite important is also the issue of restraint, especially restraint by major powers, because that is, I think, one of those elements that allows actors, especially small actors like Singapore, to have the space, to have the scope in which to pursue its interests, to pursue the sort of cooperation that's necessary. So I suppose that is an area where the PRC might be more demonstrative of how it wants to sort of allay the concerns of its neighbors, how it wants to show that it is a restrained major power.
And let's just unpack Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jun's speech, where he actually talked about equal partnerships. He talked about ditching zero-sum games. How does that square with regards to Taiwan and also what's happening in the South China Sea?
So it's pretty interesting with Admiral Dong Jun's statements, because the talk about equality, about ditching zero-sum games, I think that, when push comes to shove, we have to see how Beijing reacts to weaker actors when its extensive claims over the South China Sea seems to exclude the possibility of compromise with other actors. That seems pretty zero-sum to many observers. The claim over Taiwan, doesn't allow much space or scope for Taiwan to maneuver. So legitimately, I think many people will wonder whether that idea about a non-zero-sum approach applies only among major powers in Beijing's eyes, or does it apply equally? After all, if we go back to former Foreign Minister Yang Jiechi, he did make an emphasis on the difference between big powers and small powers.
Right. And the Defense Minister, Dong Jin, he also talked about the concept of national security, basically, avoiding small yards and high fences. What exactly is he really getting at?
That language is a very specific reference to the U.S. approach to technology. So the U.S. has been talking about having a small yard, so over tighter management over a small area of technologies with high fences, and these would be, more protected. So that's the small yard, high fence. So when Admiral Dong Jun uses that language, I suppose he's going at this idea that the U.S. is restricting key technologies going to the PRC. Now, this is a fairly interesting approach because on the one hand, it shows that the PRC is feeling some pressure, but on the other hand, the PRC likes to claim that it has the capability and technology to catch up, if not even leapfrog. So if that's the case, then it should not matter whether the US does small yard high fences or not.
So after talking about small yard and high fences, the Chinese Defense Minister, he also mentioned that there's a need to manage these risks from emerging tech like AI. But, help us understand this, Professor. China recently also refused to sign this non-binding ban on using AI for nuclear arms control. So can you just help us understand that contradiction there?
So, PRC is not too unlike other major powers. All of them would like to have their cake and eat it too. What makes a major power different from everybody else is that they are more able to get away with these kinds of things. So the issue with AI and warfare, essentially the core principle is if we have AI making decisions, will there be a situation where you have sort of kill chains that include no humans? That brings up moral and ethical questions. That brings about questions about proportionality. Now, with nuclear weapons, of course, that becomes far more important. However, I suppose if you wanted to develop a certain capability, you may not want to be restrained. This gets back to the issue of self-restraint that I talked about earlier. Are major powers willing to subject themselves to more limitations in order to assure others? So certainly that tension you highlight creates certain apprehensions among other interlocutors of the PRC.
So also, Professor, the extent of U.S. engagement and also influence at this forum this time around, what is your general sense there, and also who are some of the other key attendees at the forum that we should be looking out for or take notice of?
So there is pretty senior U.S. involvement in this forum. You see Michael Chase from the U.S. Defense Department. So that continues the momentum, the inertia of dialogue among senior defense officials that has been ongoing. We just recently saw the conclusion of talks between the Southern Theater Commander from the PRC and the US Indo-PACOM Commander. So those efforts intend to avoid miscalculation, avoid miscommunication, especially if crises emerge. And also they are intended to avoid crises. So that momentum, I think, is useful to have. We won't see any big major resolution. Other invitees that are perhaps useful to watch, of course, Russia, China's PRC's close partner. But in addition to that, we see a Filipino delegation to the Xiangshan Forum. And I suppose there we can watch to see whether there are efforts to try to moderate some of the tension that is ongoing in the South China Sea or the West Philippine Sea.
Yeah, that's a good point you made, Professor, because also what's noticeably missing from Dong Jun's speech was any mention of the Philippines dispute in the South China Sea. So any idea what's behind that omission?
Right. So this is the question that comes up is whether Dong Jun's speech is targeted just at other major powers, right? One of the understandings of how the PRC runs its foreign policy is that it has one standard for major powers and there's another standard for actors who it doesn't see as its equal. So legitimately, we can ask whether that's Dong Jun's speech is targeting the US and just focusing on the US, or whether it's much broader, and perhaps the PRC and the Philippines are not ready at this point to make known some of their discussions, or perhaps their discussions haven't been progressing as well as either or both sides would prefer. So it leaves a lot of room for guesswork.
Absolutely right. Okay, let's just touch on the fact that the defense minister also called for peaceful negotiations to resolve conflicts, whether it's in Ukraine or Israel-Palestine. What do you think China is actually willing to do to support those negotiations?
So, world peace is what everybody wants, right? But I think when push comes to shove, we have to see whether the PRC is putting more pressure on encouraging Russia to pull back. That is not apparent at this point. The PRC side has been trying to bring together different Palestinian sides in the Middle East. They've also been trying to bring together different Middle Eastern parties, notably Saudi Arabia and Iran. Now, whether these materialize into anything more concrete, I guess we'll really have to wait and see, because the PRC, they've made the right kinds of noises, they've said the right kinds of things, as you just highlighted. But when the language and the action sort of are compared, the action bit is a little less noticeable. I wouldn't rule out the fact that there may be things going on behind the scenes, but then we have to look at results, and the results are not yet apparent.
All right, just time for one last question very quickly. This is quite a macro question, but how do you think China's vision for global security governance actually differ from what's already out there?
So this is where the PRC, I think, can afford to be a little bit more concrete, right? On the one hand, we do have international institutions. The PRC is very actively engaged in them, things like the UN. Now, then it comes down to, okay, where does it sit with key norms, rules, and laws, such as, say, the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, where it has a lot of differences with other actors. It doesn't recognize the arbitral tribunal ruling. So these are areas where I suppose Beijing can try to square the circle a little bit more, because they're saying that there's a lot of stuff they don't want. But what is it that they want? How do they actualize this idea of equality? How do they actualize this idea of inclusivity and universality? So that's something that, I really anticipate Beijing trying to fill out and make concrete for everybody.
It's always good chatting with you. I'm going to leave you to enjoy the rest of your Friday evening. Associate Professor Chong Jia-Yen from the National University of Singapore. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol's approval rating has plunged to a historic low of 20% since taking office in 2022. A survey conducted by polling agency Gallup Korea has a margin error of plus or minus 3.1 percentage points, and it shows Mr. Yoon's approval rating dropping by 3 percentage points from the previous week. Negative ratings of the leader, meanwhile, climbed to an all-time high of 70%, up 3% over the same period. Some 1,000 adults participated in the survey. And those who viewed Mr. Yoon negatively faulted him for his handling of medical school quotas, the economy, along with his ability to communicate. And this comes amid months-long healthcare crisis in the country, where a special emergency medical response period has been declared for the coming 2 weeks due to a prolonged protest by young doctors. Well, earlier this year, Mr. Yoon also apologized for his wife's conduct over a luxury handbag scandal, prompting a probe into whether the First Lady broke any laws. Approval rating for the ruling People Power Party also fell to its lowest level under the Yoon administration. In other news, Pope Francis has wrapped up his 11-day trip to the Asia-Pacific with a message for young people to be brave and take risks. He adds that they should use that courage and engage in dialogues. On his final day in Singapore, he held an interreligious session with youths and visited a home for the elderly. Geraldine Yap has more.
A rapturous welcome for Pope Francis as he arrived at Catholic Junior College. And there was more to come. Cheers of Papa Francesco filled the auditorium, bringing a smile to his face. 600 people from schools as well as interfaith and religious organizations were present, including 10 on stage from different faiths. The Pope's humor shone through at times as he encouraged young people to step out of their comfort zone.
Chi ha paura di sbagliare è un vecchio.
A young person that is afraid and doesn't take risks is an old person.
He also urged them to use this courage to engage in interreligious dialogue, which is important to avoid conflict. Culture, Community and Youth Minister Edwin Tong thanked the Pope for being a strong advocate for dialogue, unity and charity.
The visit of Your Holiness to Singapore galvanizes our communities, especially our youths, to unite and to renew our hope for the future. Today's dialogue is an important one. It takes us one more step towards fostering dialogue amongst our youth and across generations to build a better world.
The youths then recited a pledge of unity and hope before a final group photo with the Pope.
He was teaching us about how we should move forward and how we should always take the first step forward and to not remain stagnant in one place.
He said, please pray for us. Misericordia. This was the word I used. And he got very happy because I spoke in his language as well.
All this served as a spark for us moving forward to rival this harmonious way of living and working together and having this deeper understanding and building friendships and bridges between faith, religion, or even interracial.
Before leaving, the Pope put the finishing touches to a batik art piece signifying Singapore's racial and religious harmony and met with religious leaders. Pope Francis also received another warm welcome at St. Teresa's home. 100 residents of different religions from 3 nursing homes got the chance to see the Pope up close during a pastoral visit when he gave his blessings to the elderly.
I feel so great, so happy to see the Pope for the second time. I'm so happy, so joyful in my heart.
Peace, religious unity and engaging the youths have been key themes during this trip, the longest of his papacy. It took him across 4 countries: Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Timor-Leste and Singapore. For now, it's a much-needed rest for the 87-year-old as Vatican City beckons.
Well, up next on East Asia Tonight, we take a look at how artificial intelligence is helping officials in Taiwan predict the path of tropical storm Bebinca. East Asia bracing for more extreme weather. Severe tropical storm Bebinca is expected to blow through the Philippines today. Well, despite its classification at the moment, the weather event is continuing to grow, and the storm is expected to hit parts of China and Japan with increasing intensity in the coming days. Well, the Hong Kong Observatory says Bebinca is currently blowing winds at around 105 kilometers per hour. Experts expect it to develop into a typhoon by tomorrow. Well, the storm is due to pass through the area just north of Japan's Okinawa prefecture before further intensifying into a severe typhoon. From there, the weather event is expected to cross into China and hit Shanghai directly. Meteorologists expect Bebinca from there on to decrease in intensity and head to Wuhan. Meantime, meteorologists tracking tropical storm Bebinca have been making use of a new ally: artificial intelligence. Taiwan is blending AI with traditional forms of forecasting in hopes that this could prove instrumental in storm preparation. The Central Weather Administration in Taipei first used the AI tools in July to map the path of Typhoon Gemi. The software, powered by tech industry giants, including NVIDIA, was reportedly able to predict Gemi's behavior nearly 20% more accurately than conventional methods over a week before it made landfall. Well, as for Storm Bebinca, AI predictions show that it will not directly impact the island. While still largely experimental, experts say that the use of AI could shape the future of storm mapping and meteorology. Cleanup efforts are underway in Vietnam in the wake of Typhoon Yagi. Well, the death toll from Asia's biggest storm this year has surged to at least 233, and more than 100 others are still missing. Weather officials say floodwaters have receded in the hard-hit northern province of Thanh Nguyen, but warn that some areas, including parts of Hanoi, remain inundated. Millions of residents are struggling with flooded homes and businesses, and repair shops are now straining to deal with a huge backlog of damaged property.
Hơn 200 máy vừa là của em cũng bán cũ ra mua linh kiện, với thứ hai là 2 phần của khách, rất chi là nhiều. Không còn ứ nước, uống nước nữa thì mọi người gần như là cần thiết lắm, nên là dắt đến chúng tôi luôn, đến để gọi xử lý nhanh để là cả nhà trông vào đấy. Có thể là những người còn đang thiếu lương thực hoặc những cái sự cố nào đó trong quá trình ngập lụt ấy, thì là rất cần đến phương tiện. Tôi đã làm việc ngày 2 hôm nay rồi, làm việc liên tục.
Yagi made landfall on Saturday with winds of up to 150 kilometers per hour. Despite weakening, it's continued to trigger heavy downpours, causing rivers to swell and forcing people to evacuate. Neighboring countries also felt the wrath of the storm. Myanmar says 36 people have died, while 50,000 people have been forced to flee from their homes. Meantime, the death toll in Thailand has risen to 9. Some flights have resumed at Chiang Rai International Airport, but passengers have been advised to allow up to 5 hours to reach the terminal due to severe flooding. And ahead on Asia tonight, here are some of the stories we're also covering. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer set to meet U.S. President Joe Biden in Washington. How will they respond to Ukraine's push to firearms made by the West into Russia? And India's top court grants bail to opposition leader and Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal after months in jail on corruption charges his supporters say are politically motivated. These stories and more on Asia tonight, 8 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time, right here on CNA. And that wraps up Friday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget, you can get your headlines anytime at cna.asia and find us on Facebook, YouTube, and on X. Have a great weekend.